The Farm Dust Regulation Prevention Act is quite simple. It seeks regulatory certainty in the short time and a regulatory common sense approach in the long term. Specifically, this legislation does two things. First, the short term. The Farm Dust Regulation Prevention Act would temporarily prohibit the EPA from issuing a new coarse particulate matter standard for 1 year. H.R. 1633 does not prohibit EPA from issuing a revised standard for coarse particulate matter after this 1 year timeout. Coarse particulate matter, or PM10, is also known by a much more common name, dust. Second, in the longer term, this legislation would limit future EPA regulation of nuisance dust to areas where it is not already regulated by state or local government, where it causes substantial adverse effects and where the benefits of the EPA stepping in would outweigh the cost. Nuisance dust is particulate matter that is generated primarily from natural sources, dirt roads, earth moving, or other common farm activities. A nuisance dust, pieces of plants plowed up during tilling of soil, distributed by movement of livestock, or bits of rock kicked up by a truck driving down a dirt road. The definition specifically precludes combustion emissions, coal combustion residues, and radioactive particulate matter from mining operations. H.R. 1633 does not eliminate EPA's authority to step in if local or state regulatory efforts fall short of what is needed to adequately protect the public. The bill would allow EPA to step in and regulate nuisance dust in areas where states and localities do not do so, if substantially hurts the public health and if benefits of applying these standards outweigh the cost. So in summary, if it isn't regulated, would harm the public health, and the benefit of regulation would outweigh the cost of regulation, and the EPA could and presumably would fill that void. While EPA Administrator Jackson has announced that she does not plan on changing this standard, EPA has been actively considering a revised, more costly and stringent standard as part of the review process. The same review process increased the stringency of that standard in 1996 and most recently in 2006. Prior to the Administrator's announcement, EPA staff had recommended further changes to the standard. Despite Administrator Jackson's statement, there is nothing currently on the books preventing the EPA from adopting a stricter regulation. Further, as we all know, the environmental lobby could force a more stringent standard regardless of what the EPA announces, finalizes, or proposes through legal action. This legislation provides ironclad certainty to farmers, ranchers, small business owners, and that farm dust would stay off the to-do list for at least another year. For that very reason, farming, agriculture, rural, small business organizations of all shapes and sizes have put their steadfast support behind this legislation. To them, certainty means the ability to grow their business by creating jobs in their communities, feeding every American, and providing for their families through the sale of the fruits of their labors. The agriculture community, and more largely rural America, is critical to the economic growth of job creation. The agriculture sector alone supports 1.8 million American jobs and represents 5% of our nation's total exports. The Obama administration has acknowledged the importance of economic health for rural America. In fact, the President's White House Council on White House Rural Council has claimed that rural America is the center or central to the economic health and prosperity of our nation. Unfortunately, it is often rural communities, particularly those in western United States, that suffer from the highest rates of unemployment and are least equipped to bear the burden of additional costs stemming from Washington. So once again, Madam Speaker, I rise to support this rule and the underlying legislation. The relevant committee of jurisdictions has worked to provide us with a bipartisan bill which is at its core, quite simply, offers regulatory certainty in the short term and common sense regulatory relief in the long. This bill is not a cure-all, but is a step in the right direction. While a small step, it is a common sense approach to fixing what's wrong in Washington, D.C. It's a step that many in Congress on both sides of the aisles seem ready and willing to take. As I mentioned, the Farm Dust Regulation Prevention Act passed out of subcommittee and full committee with bipartisan support. The bill has over 100 bipartisan co-sponsors. Companion legislation also in the Senate enjoys that same bipartisan support. Let's assure rural businesses and American farmers that at least for one more year they can cross dust off the list of the potential bureaucratic burdens passed down from Washington. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves.